Which brings us to Act 3. Jesus makes a very public royal entry into Jerusalem for Passover. People are hailing him as the Messiah. Then he enters into the temple courtyard and he asserts his royal authority by running out the thieves and crooks and stopping the sacrificial system. Then this kicks off a whole week of Jesus debating and confronting the leaders of Israel, condemning their hypocrisy, and so they set in motion a plan to have him killed. And Jesus warns his disciples, predicting that Jerusalem and its temple will be destroyed within a generation, and his disciples will be persecuted just like him, until he returns one day to bring God's kingdom fully over the world. And it all leads up to the final night. Jesus has his last Passover meal with the disciples, a symbolic meal that told the story of Israel's liberation from slavery through the death of the Passover lamb. And Jesus takes these symbols and he gives them new meaning. They point to the liberation from sin and death that will happen through the death of the suffering servant Messiah. From here, the story rushes forward to Jesus' arrest, his trial before Israel's priests and the Roman governor Pilate, all resulting in Jesus' crucifixion. And it culminates in a key scene that matches the important scenes from Acts 1 and 2, except this time it's darkness that descends, not a cloud. And instead of the divine voice from heaven, it's Jesus' voice crying out before he dies. And then most surprising is that it's a Roman soldier who sees Jesus die, who grasps and then announces who Jesus is. This man was the Son of God. He's the first person in the story to recognize the story's shocking claim about Jesus' identity, that it's the crucified Son of God who's the Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth, who died for his friends and for his enemies. After this, Jesus' body is placed in a tomb, and on the first day of the new week, 2 women from his disciples come to the tomb, and they discover that the tomb is empty, the stone's rolled away, and an angelic man informs them that Jesus isn't here, that he's risen from the dead. And so he orders them to go and tell this good news to the other disciples, that Jesus is alive, that he'll meet them back up in Galilee. And the women, they're freaked out. Mark says that they fled from the tomb in terror, telling no one, for they were afraid. And that's how the book ends, with Jesus' disciples showing the same kind of fear and confusion that concluded Acts 2 and 1.
So good, so good. My name is Mike. If I've not had the chance to meet you yet, Christy, who was up earlier, is my better half, and we are the co-lead pastors of Larkspur Church and Smoky Hill Vineyard. So glad to celebrate Easter Sunday with you. So the church tradition is that the person up front or somebody says, like Trayvon a few minutes ago, he is risen, and everybody says he is risen indeed. So let's try this. He is risen. Well done. I have decided that for us from now on, we're going to shorten that to one word. All we really need is indeed, okay? So, he is risen, and everybody just says, indeed. Yeah, because when else do you use the word indeed? It's an antiquated word, right? And unless you're looking for a job, it's not a word that pops up very often, right? So, indeed.com, right? So just saying, yeah. So when people walk around and say he is risen, just say, yeah, indeed, bro. Right. That's the way to go. I'm starting a new trend. We'll see if it holds. You know how when everybody says whatever, and then they just say whatevs? They just shorten it, right? So we're just saying indeed. All right. That didn't work as well as it did in first service, so that's okay. I don't know about you, but for many of us, we have kind of Easter traditions. And even the word Easter, it kind of some people go, well, am I supposed to say Happy Resurrection Day? Am I supposed to say Happy Easter? What's the right protocol here? I just will tell you the word Easter actually is from the Latin word esostarum, which means white week. So the early church would refer to this as the white week, when people would dress up in white gowns and robes and get baptized as a part of Holy Week. And so even going all the way back to the early days of the church, many of the older liturgical and Orthodox churches still do baptisms on Easter Sunday as a part of it. And they have the white robes that people put on, and they get baptized. So that's where the word actually comes from. But for us, as we celebrate Easter, it's not just about Easter bunnies and really fun traditions. Although I have a couple, if you want, you can steal our traditions. We have 2 traditions. One is my personal Mike's tradition, and that is that Easter has to be filled with Cadbury eggs. No, I'm serious. There's got to be Cadbury eggs in my home for me for Easter. As a matter of fact, now that they make the caramel Cadbury egg, it's like 2 in 1. It's like the best thing ever. Matter of fact, I'm so convinced that this is from the Lord that I think we're going to have these at the resurrection. at the meal as we're in heaven in eternity with God. I think there's going to be caramel Cadbury eggs. Just, you're welcome right now for the pre-warning. So when you get to heaven, there's Cadbury eggs, you're like, wow, that guy was right. Yep, it's coming. It's happening. Lord, please, I'm just saying. So, but the other thing we do as a Cawley family tradition is that we do these silly string wars. Yes. Do you know what happens in a silly string war when you're the dad? That's right. Everybody shoots me. As a matter of fact, I think they pre-test the cans that don't work and give those to me so that I just get hammered. So I literally just go home and stand there and go, okay, everybody hit me. Yep, okay. Funny, dad's all covered in silly string. All right, so that's if you need some help, those are two that you are welcome to steal and do whatever with. But maybe as we celebrate Easter and we talk about the resurrection story, maybe you find yourself going, man, I've heard this story a bunch. Yes, Jesus died on the cross for our sins. Yes, he is risen again on the third day. Yes, I've heard the story. I understand. Can we just have more coffee and donuts? Yes, I get it. Here's my hope for you today, and I'm going to use an analogy of what I do at weddings. At weddings, when I do a marriage ceremony with a couple, and the couple comes and says, hey, we'd like you to share kind of a little sermon or a few words or whatever as a challenge, and every once in a while I'll have a couple come along and say, we'd like you to do like a half an hour, and I'm going, no, you don't want me to do a half an hour. Because as you're standing up there in front of everybody, holding hands, looking longingly into each other's eyes, the last thing you want to do is listen to my voice for half an hour. All you really want to do is get to the end and go, let's have the party part, right? Okay, nobody here has ever been married. You don't remember those moments? Like if you're at a wedding ceremony, you're like, can they be done? Like, what's taking so long? Let's get this over with. So the truth is, though, is that when I show up to share at a wedding, is I realize that the rest of the people, though, actually listen in a way that they probably didn't even listen at their own ceremony. And so I look at it as an opportunity to go, hey, maybe somewhere along your journey of your marriage, maybe you need to rethink. Do you remember what it was like when you first said I do? Do you remember what it was like when you first committed your life to another person? Maybe there's something there that God wants to speak to you today out of your own marriage, and what's it look like for you to lean in? So I would say the same thing for us today as we think about the resurrection story. Maybe you have been following Jesus since you're 4 and you're now 84. And you've been doing this for 80 years. And you go, I don't know what else I could learn about the resurrection or what else God might want to speak to me. Well, let me say this. You are here, you are breathing, and the Lord is still speaking. And until he calls you home to heaven, he still has things to say to us. So what I want to encourage you, that even if you've heard this story many times, is what's God want to speak to me today? What's God's invitation today for me? And if you're on the other end of the spectrum where you're like, I'm not even sure I buy this whole Jesus thing, I'm here because somebody made me come or because I love somebody, or I just felt like I should go, hey, let me tell you, we are really glad you're here. And I also promise you this, nobody's going to make you do anything. We're going to hopefully let Lord encounter you and let Jesus encounter you, but nobody's going to require anything of you. There's going to be I'm not going to ask for routing numbers as you leave in your bank accounts, right? I'm not going to ask you to give away your firstborn, although some of you are going, please, please. No, I'm just kidding. So just know that our hope would be that maybe you would encounter Jesus today. All right, one last caveat, and then we'll head into Mark 16. There are kids in the room, and so glad to be worshiping with our kids today. Kids, here's the good news. I'm not going to go super, super long, and you have word searches in front of you. Now, let me tell you, I had one kid last night find 6 extra words in the word search. Anybody who can find 7, come let me know, and you get an extra donut, okay? All right, just making that offer to you as well. And then there are stones that we have outside for kids to do a craft afterwards, or even people who call themselves adults but are really kids at heart. You can also do a stone craft and write a word on a stone. All right. So we have been, as a church, we've been going through a series on Mark where we've been talking about the good news of Jesus, the good news of Mark. And the word gospel literally means good news. And so as we've been going through this, we're now hitting the very end. For us as a church, this is the last chapter of Mark. So we're going to hit Mark 16, and we're going to start in 16 verse 1. And part of the Bible Project videos that we showed just before this, was a way of giving you a kind of a heads up of what's been happening up to this point in Mark. And if you were looking for ways to even engage with Scripture with some help, I would recommend the Bible Project. They do a great job of giving overviews of what's happening, and they have cartoons. And I think gospel spread in cartoons is always better than just somebody talking, okay? All right, so Mark 16, we're going to go to verse 1. This is after Jesus has been on the cross on Friday. It's now the Sabbath. It starts on Saturday. No, it starts Friday night at dark and runs through Saturday at dark. And now this is the next morning on Sunday. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so they might go anoint Jesus' body. Very early on the day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb, and they asked each other, "Who will roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb?" But when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. And as they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. You could rewrite that word alarmed as freaked out, scared out of their minds, weren't quite sure what to do, terrified. The angel, as it turns out, is who the young man is, says, "Don't be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene, who was crucified. He has risen." Yes, well done. "He is not here. See the place where they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you." Trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. All right, so this account ends with the women leaving just like terrified. I don't know what's happened, what's going on, a little freaked out. All right, so let's say a couple things. If you have a Bible in front of you and you're a super perceptive person, you're going to go, but wait, there's more. There's verses 9 through 20, correct? Many of the Bibles actually have other language. They'll put little things in parentheses or little caveats where they say the earliest manuscripts of Mark did not have these verses 9 through 20. And so here's what I want to say about that, because we're not going to cover 9 through 20. I actually think this ending is better, but let me say this about 9 through 20. The early church spent a ton of time praying and seeking God and even looking at all the different manuscripts to go, what is accurate? What do we include in the early Bible? So let me say this. First of all, if they've included it, I think it's fine. I think we could absolutely go there. I like the way it ends at verse 8 because it fits the way Mark has written the rest of his gospel. Super sudden, super dramatic, everything is super quick. And everything that's in 9 through 20 is also mentioned in either Matthew or Luke or John. So there's nothing about it that you go, well, maybe that's not, it doesn't matter. It all fits. It's all accurate from the standpoint of those things actually did happen, and they're mentioned in the other Gospels. But I actually want us to stop at verse 8, because I think that's a great place to stop. These women were left with a decision. What are we going to do with what just happened? What are we going to do? Now, when it says they don't tell anyone, what that means is they didn't run around and grab the gardener. Hey, look, he's risen. They didn't go into town shouting, he's risen. They weren't quite sure what to do with this moment. So yes, they did go back to the disciples and say, we don't know what's happened, but his body's not there, is actually what they go back and say. So it's not like they didn't go tell the disciples. They just didn't tell everybody else on the way because they weren't quite sure what all these things meant. If we're honest with ourselves, everyone in this room at some point has had to decide what you're going to do with Jesus. And if you're honest with yourself, there are times where you've wondered, I'm not quite sure what this means. I'm not quite sure that this following Jesus thing makes any difference. I'm not sure that there's something that actually happens. I'm not sure what it means to follow Jesus. I'm not sure why everybody makes such a big deal about this. Or maybe you're in this place where you go, well, at some point I invited Jesus in my heart and somebody dunked me in water and they held me down for a while and made sure it worked, right? And I was baptized and all those different things, but I don't feel like my life's that different. I don't feel like anything's really changed. Or maybe you've been following Jesus for a long time and you're like, if you knew the circumstances of my life, it doesn't even feel like he exists. Like seriously, it doesn't take very much time to watch the news or to read the news and realize how broken our world is. And so maybe you're like the women. You're not quite sure what to do with it. Maybe you're not quite freaked out of your mind, although maybe you are. I just want to give you good news. There's a few different things I want to point out from this story that I think are such good news. Because as I read this story of the resurrected Jesus, and I know how much it changes the world, we can look back at this moment and go, okay, but did he really come back from the grave? Like, is this a real thing? Like, could the disciples just have gone and hid his body somewhere and said, look, he's risen, right? Let me give you a few different things. If I were God, this is not the way I would write this story. If I were God, I would have, first of all, put Jesus in a castle, in a palace, that when he's born, he would have been born to a royal family, to much fanfare, to everybody else who's there, people are writing down all these different moments of what's happening. All the historians are heralding this moment. This is not the way I would have done it. Jesus comes into the world in a manger, lying in a place where animals feed. He does everything backwards because God is so brilliant in the way he's written this story. And then at the end, when Jesus is risen, the first people to find out are the women. Did you know in the first century world, women were not allowed to testify in court? See, I think it actually speaks something to God's character in this. God created an upside-down kingdom that's exactly opposite of everything we think it should be. We think a king and a ruler should be the one who commands authority and tells everybody else what to do. And Jesus does it exactly opposite. He comes to serve. All the way down to the night he's betrayed, he washes the feet of the man who's going to betray him. He serves as a leader. He does everything opposite to what we would do as human nature. And if I imagine who I would have at the gravesite where the stone's been rolled away, here's what I imagine. I would have written the story this way. I would have taken the head of the Sanhedrin, the religious leaders. I would have taken that guy. I would have had him meet Herod, the Hebrew king, and then Pilate, the Roman prefect, for coffee in the morning. No, seriously, I would have had them go meet together for coffee. This is the way I would have set the story up if I were God. I would have had them meet together for coffee in the morning to celebrate their victory. And as they're having their coffee, the stone gets rolled away. Jesus walks out and goes, "You got another cup?" That's the way I would have told the story. I would have taken the three most significant and influential figures of the day and had them tell a story that way. But that's not the way God does it. And I want to tell you that is actually good news for you and I. The reason it's good news is it means that God doesn't play favorites. He doesn't look at people by human standards. He doesn't evaluate people by their wealth or their power or their authority or their influence. He sees everyone. And everyone is available and has space to be in his kingdom with him. Everyone. And he looks past even what we would consider the least of these in these different moments. And he says, "You are welcome. Matter of fact, I'm going to use you to be the first to know about me." I look at this also in a moment of going, Jesus does everything, or God does everything backwards, and it's so unexpected. And we think sometimes that the resurrection story, we go, well, I'm sure there are people getting resurrected all over the place. I mean, he just brought Lazarus back from the grave, right? Not long before this moment. Well, that's true, but there were no other resurrections. It's not like the historian Josephus is writing about all these different resurrections that are happening all over Israel. Nobody in the first century was going, we believe in resurrections. It can happen all over the place. People get raised from the dead all the time. No, it didn't happen. It didn't happen. Matter of fact, the disciples clue you into this. They actually are concerned about ghosts when Jesus is walking on water. They think he's a ghost because they don't know what to do with this. We sometimes think, well, the first century world, they didn't understand how physics worked. They didn't understand how medicine worked. They didn't understand how the body worked, right? They didn't understand that, like, Jesus actually died. Maybe he just was, like, kind of sleeping, maybe a little bit, like his heart rate was still kind of slowly fluttering. They didn't understand. No, they understood. They understood how to tell if somebody was dead. C.S. Lewis, in his book, God in the Dock, writes about this, and he talks about how there's so many arguments for people going, well, the first century world didn't understand science. They didn't understand physiology. And he says, oh, no, they understood. Matter If I had to use this example of Joseph, Jesus' father, married to Mary. He says Joseph fully understood what it meant that Mary was pregnant, and they had not been together yet. It's not that he didn't know how babies were made. He clearly knew how babies were made. And he didn't understand. So he was trying to divorce Mary quietly because he was trying to protect her so she would not get stoned. The point in this is that we pretend like, oh, we're so knowledgeable in this 21st century. First century people didn't understand. No, they knew how babies were made, and they also understood that when people died, they didn't come back. So there's the second thing. And then here's the third. And this is the one's the most compelling to me. The most compelling argument to the resurrection actually happened is this. At the cross, of the 11 disciples left, Judas has now left the group, so there's 11 disciples left. At the cross, there was exactly one disciple. Jesus is hanging on the cross, dying. And that was John. And most theologians believe that John was there because he was so young he would not be labeled a co-conspirator. He was too young to be considered a co-conspirator with Jesus, who was trying to overthrow the government. All the other 10, they have scattered to the wind. They're hiding, they're running, they're afraid for their very lives. What would take those 10 men, who all, by the way, end up dying for the sake of the gospel, what would make them be willing to give their life away? They wouldn't do it for a hoax. They wouldn't do it for a lie. They wouldn't, if it wasn't real, they wouldn't be like, well, let's pretend, right? No. I mean, I guess there's 1 in 8 million who's so stubborn they might do it just for a hoax because they don't want to be, because they've convinced themselves of a lie. But I want to point out that, I look at that and I go, what would make Peter, the man who denied Jesus 3 times, so afraid that church history says that he actually died, crucified, upside down? What would make Peter be willing to do that? See, I look at the story of Jesus being risen and I go, what Jesus did on the cross paid for my sins. But when Jesus rose from the dead, he stamped paid in full on my life. Everything about following Jesus hinges on his resurrection. Everything. And yes, there will be a day when we will all rise with him and be called into eternity with him. And then there will be Cadbury eggs with caramel inside them. Just wait. Please, Jesus. Please. This upside down kingdom. What a beautiful picture and beautiful invitation. So I'm gonna shift gears here real quick, and we're gonna finish we're gonna watch a video. Let me just kind of set this up. We had a young lady in our church, Audra, share some of her story, and the story is actually, it's a beautiful story, and if you want to hear the fuller story, she will be glad to share it with you. We've tried to clip it down, but let me just share it this way. What I think is beautiful about Audra's story is that she had already made a decision to say yes to Jesus, but she will admit to you that she wasn't really following him. And I do think that as we think about what does it look like for us to make a decision for the Lord today? I want to ask you, are you ready to take whatever the next step is? Whatever that next decision point is. And as we watch Audra's story, I just pay particular attention to the word paralyzed, the way she uses. Okay? So let's watch her story.
Hey guys, I am Audra, and I found the Larkspur church family, almost a year ago, and have just encountered the Lord so much. January 15th of 2023, God tapped me on the shoulder and literally said, "Hello, my beautiful daughter. What are you doing with your life? I love you so much. I know that you think that you can't trust me, but you can. I'm not going to force you to choose me. I'm not going to force you to surrender your life to me, but I'm here and I love you just as much right now as I loved you the moment that you gave me your heart way back in Nicaragua in 2015. What do you choose? And I did not want to admit that I heard God's voice in that way because I knew what that would look like. On March 21st of 2023, I was in a really intense accident on a one-wheel. I smacked my head on the concrete without a helmet. My humerus bone snapped in half. My entire arm was paralyzed for over 100 days last year. I saw 8 different surgeons. A lot of my injuries were actually missed. And on April 26th, I woke up, I was in the Word, and loud and clear, I heard God say, I've been waiting for you. I have so much for you, for your assignment here on earth. But when are you going to hang out with me? When are you going to give me your heart? When are you going to let me guide your life instead of acting like you're in control? And it was so freeing and so beautiful. And my journey of physical recovery and healing was insane and full-time and financially draining, emotionally draining, like all the things. But I learned how to show up and work hard and pray harder. And God literally healed my arm, my paralyzed arm that one doctor said would actually never work again. And in the midst of my physical healing and all the miracles that he was blessing me with, what he was really doing was helping me with my paralyzed heart and my paralyzed mind. And so praise God that he will continue to chase us no matter how many times we turn from him, no matter how many times we don't feel like we're good enough for him. I was so overwhelmed with shame, with guilt, self-hatred, fear, all kinds of things that were blocking me from really truly receiving the free, amazing, beautiful gift of forgiveness that Jesus has for us. And I'm just so thankful to be here.
Isn't that beautiful? So good. Audra's story is one of a miracle. But what I think is really fascinating as we've had a chance to walk through it with her for the last 10 months or so, is that the story has not been one of like complete healing right away. It was this one of God doing something internally first before he started doing something physically. She kept saying yes. It was like all this incredible healing happening to her physically as well. Paralyzed heart, paralyzed mind. See, I do think that the Lord keeps showing up and give plenty of opportunities for us to say yes. And so now I'm just going to ask you to even pray about what kind of decision is the Lord inviting you into. Again, if you've been walking with him and journeying with him for a long time, I still think there's things he wants us to step into. I don't think we ever stop growing. I don't think we ever stop learning. I don't think we ever stop developing as followers of Jesus. And I think it just prepares us for eternity. So what might that look like for you? And maybe you're in a different place where you're going, I've been following Jesus for a while and just things feel dry and they feel like joyless. What would it look like to maybe ask God to give you a picture of what that could look like to step into more, to see life and joy? Maybe you have said yes to Jesus like Audra had it, and at some point you just kind of been like, yeah, it's like an accessory, right? Jesus is like a handbag or a satchel or a backpack. I use him to carry around stuff for me, but I don't really, it's not engaging all the time. Maybe there's something the Lord's inviting you into where you really deepen your faith. You step all the way in. And maybe you're still trying to figure things out. What would it look like for you to take a first step? Maybe the invitation is as simple as going, hey, Jesus, if you're real, show yourself to me. What can go wrong with that prayer? And so I'll just add this. If everything in your life is perfect, then you can ignore everything I just said. I mean, if everything's perfect, you should keep doing what you're doing. But my guess is that for most of us, we're not living at 100 all the time. We're living somewhere between 10 and 50. And the 50 is the good day. So what's God's invitation for you? So I'm just going to invite you. We're going to take about 15 seconds. I'm just going to invite the Lord. I want to encourage you to maybe just take a moment, even Maybe close your eyes, just rest in his presence, and see if he doesn't speak to you in these next 10 or 15 seconds, okay? So Lord, through your Spirit, come right now and meet each and every one of us. What's your invitation for us today? So for many of us, that invitation is usually the thing we don't want to do. That's how we know it's God. My invitation never sounds like, Mike, you should play more video games. I'm going to lead you through a prayer, and then we're going to finish with some worship. And so here's the prayer. It's Psalm 51, verses 1 and 2, and then I've added a line of my own at the end of this. And what I would say for you is if you're even looking for ways to engage with God this week, try praying this as you wake up in the morning, maybe before your even first cup of coffee. Pray Psalm 51, 1 and 2, and just pray it every morning and invite God to meet you. So if you would you just pray this prayer with me as we read it out loud together, okay? Have mercy on me, O God, because of your unfailing love. Because of your great compassion, blot out the stain of my sins. Wash me clean from my guilt. Purify me from my sin. Jesus, come and meet me, redeem me, and save me. Amen. Amen. Thank you so much for being with us today. So we also believe, by the way, that following Jesus should be fun. So Trayvon and the team have got a great song that is a lot of fun for us to close with and actually speak some tremendous truth. So let's stand, let's engage. He's actually going to ask you to clap a little bit, so we're going to clap some, all right? We're going to have some fun, all right? Now, let's go, Trey.